In a previous parish assignment, I was working with a family in which the mother was originally from the southern part of India, which is actually a very Catholic area of the world. Some people don't realize that. Now, this was in a parish where we had quite a few Hispanics and even more in the town. And she would tell me, because she was a person from India, so she had darker skin, that oftentimes that when she was out, especially like say in the store, that people would think she was Hispanic. And she said, I began to understand in a way what this group of people was going through because of the way people would treat me, which was not always very kind. And it was also shocking to her because she was a medical professional to be treated that way. That was something she wasn't used to. She said what was probably more comical would be when Hispanics themselves would come up to her and start speaking Spanish. But she, of course, didn't know any Spanish. I heard her story because the first time I met her, I spoke Spanish to her as well. Our scriptures today bring up the topic of leprosy. Leprosy, in a modern term, as like a medical condition, is called Hansen's disease. But as we see in the prescription of the law from the reading of Leviticus, our first reading today, leprosy was a word that kind of was more of a broader term. It was covering all kinds of these skin conditions, particularly if you had an open sore. The problem with this is that your body was not so much infectious as it was unclean, contaminated, impure. It was really not unlike the law that says you're not supposed to touch a dead body because it can make you impure. And in some sense, if your skin is not in good condition, if there's open sores, it's almost like you're walking around with a dead body. And so you were supposed to declare yourself as unclean, and the worst part is you are to be separated from the life of the community. This is the context of the leper with leprosy in our gospel today as well. Now, as a medical condition, we have all kinds of treatments and medications that can address these medical skin conditions. But the dynamic of leprosy is still very much alive among us. In terms of especially if people have certain skin conditions. One skin condition, like I just described, is if people have skin of a different color. And how they can be treated in different ways and oftentimes not in terms of their full human dignity. Sometimes we don't realize that we might treat people differently just by the color of their skin, as my own example gave that case. We jump to a lot of conclusions about who this person is and where they're from, what they know. We can also be treated in that way as well. And the problem is that when there's that difference in color, there can be a difference in that makes it separating or isolating. They are not a part of us. I don't belong with them. Another skin condition could be that your skin's kind of wrinkly. And especially if your skin isn't so wrinkly, you could say, well, those older people, they're kind of old-fashioned, and those values don't matter much anymore. They may walk a little bit slower, or they don't have much to offer. They're not very productive. All kinds of assumptions and conclusions, and then to isolate and separate. Perhaps missing out on a ton of life experience and wisdom, among many other things. Another skin condition would be to have really soft, smooth skin, Especially if your skin's a little more wrinkly, to say those young people. They don't believe in anything. There's no common sense anymore. All they do is technology and all these assumptions that we can make are to be made about us. And then we can isolate and separate and not see how smart a young generation is and how much more of a sense of the whole world that they live in, partly because of our technology and media. This is the problem with leprosy, and the reaction to it is that it wants to separate and isolate. And Jesus has a whole different approach to this. When the leper approaches him, he allows him to come forward. He allows him to interact with him. You see, you can't make Jesus impure. Nobody is pollution, trash, impure, contaminated around Jesus. There's no way that they need to be isolated or separated. And Jesus then says that when he is asked to be made clean, I do will it. It is the will of God that all are made clean. And then the important move is go show yourself to the priest, which means go and be reinstated into the life of the community. You are separated and isolated no more. You belong. In fact, we see that before this story, and then at the end of the story that we hear in the passage today, where does Jesus go? Where is he hanging out a lot? In the exact places that the lepers were, on all these other marginalized people, in the deserted places. Where else would they live? And he is going there. I wonder if the leper even knew him previously, because Jesus was out in those parts of the outside of town, outside of the community, drawing people in. This is the animating power of the Holy Spirit, to draw people in. The Spirit of Jesus is one of unity. We experience this unbelievable power, especially when there's so much reaction to lots of different leprosy and skin conditions and the way people appear in the Eucharist, where we have this animating power of the Holy Spirit that brings us to get together in communion and say nobody is isolated and separated. Differences are differences, but they're not obstacles to coming together. Now, we're in the midst of World Marriage Day, and that's where marriage is such a beautiful sacrament as well. Two very different people coming together. And even in the diversity of all those differences, there's more the power of unity in their love. The Eucharist also then sends us forth, and what do we say? Go in peace. We have peace because we belong. We're in communion. We've experienced the unity in the Holy Spirit. And we're in peace because we know that we are clean. We know that there is nothing in us, especially when Jesus has touched us, that makes us that isolated and separated from God as well as others. This, perhaps, is where we can do the most work, is to recognize that when we're not at peace with ourselves, we're not going to be instruments of peace in the world. When we don't find a unity in ourselves and with God, that we can't be instruments of unity in the world. So this is our prayer, to approach Jesus, even if we feel too different, too separated from others, or even from Him, and to ask Him to make us clean, and that this will be our ultimate skin condition. That we ask Jesus to get under our skin.